Talking to Cornelius, Conversation 15. We need to talk about your older brother, James. He's been a quiet presence in our conversation up until now, but he was there with you, old man, in the dock at Downpatrick. He was there with you on that stomach-churning voyage of the Emily II as it made its way between Africa and South America and then across the wild expanse of the Southern Ocean. He was there with you, shuffling down the gangplank and looking around at the strange, bright world of Hobart, with its line of sandstone buildings and busy waterfront and looming mountain. And he was there with you during that first period of gang labour up at the Jerusalem probation station. There were no doubt times when he was in the same work gangs as you, up in the bush, felling and dragging trees, suffering the steady fall of sawdust in a sawpit, out on the road swinging a pick, in a crew straining to drag a loaded cart as though he was nothing more than a bullock under harness. Nobody knew the full breadth of your journey, from the fiery alleys of Belfast to the southern expanse of Van Diemen's Land, like your brother. You were a witness to each other's lives. But what kind of brothers were you? What was the nature of your relationship? There was something of a family legend that I remember hearing as a boy. It was long before we started gathering any information about your history. The legend had it that there were two brothers in Ireland. The younger one got caught up in some drama, possibly a riot, and it looked like he was going to be transported. The older brother couldn't bear the thought of his sibling being sent so far away, all on his own, so he raced off to get advice from a priest. The priest told the boy that if he went out and shot a gun in the air, then he would be sure to be transported. The boy followed the priest's advice, which proved to be correct, and so the two brothers were transported together. The legend doesn't correspond with the records. The only grain of truth is that you and James were brothers and you were transported together. But I always retained a lingering sense that your older brother was looking out for you on the journey. I believe that legends like that one can preserve some core emotional truth from the past, something of that immeasurable reality of a relationship. So, I've tended to cast you in my imagination as the fiery, reactive younger brother, while he was the more considered and diplomatic older brother. I imagined him saving you from tricky situations that were largely of your own making. And I have to admit, I quite liked imagining that you, my ancestor, had the greater share of fire in the belly. But here's the thing, old man. The more I reflect on the records, the more I'm left questioning my own presumptions about the two of you. There's good reason why you received your certificate of freedom 8 months before your brother. It seems he was the one who was more prone to complications over the course of the convict journey. The two of you went your separate ways for a time after you were given your probation passes. As we already know, you ended up working in de Grave's industrial empire at Cascades. Meanwhile, James went through 7 relatively short-term employment situations, some in the Pittwater region. He had a period of hard labour after he falsely represented himself as a general servant in Sorel. Then the most extraordinary thing happened. He was appointed to the constabulary on the 10th of November 1848, only to be charged with being drunk on duty on the 27th of November. It didn't take long for things to go pear-shaped for Jimmy. He had another bout of hard labour as a consequence of that, and I'm not sure if he continued with his police career. There was a constable, James Donnelly, who worked in the Midlands in later decades, but I think he was a different man. It's quite a thing to get our minds around the fact that a great number of police roles were performed by men who were still under sentence in Van Diemen's Land in the mid-19th century. They were known as convict or passholder constables. Critics of the arrangement were more likely to call them felon police, and few weeks went by without stories about some form of police atrocity being printed in the newspapers. Only a few weeks back, a constable, in the confidence of his superior, was proved to have committed a robbery on the highway and actually perpetrated the plunder of his victim under the terror of his badge of office. How was that fellow treated? Was he, when convicted of the robbery at the police office, sent to the Supreme Court for trial, as a free person would most properly have been? No. The magistrate was about punishing him by removing him to another station, when an order came up from headquarters for the fellow's dismissal, and there is little doubt but that he is entrusted with his baton again to practice it in highway robbery or perhaps some worse atrocity in one of the interior districts where he is unknown. The Cornwall Chronicle, Launceston, 3rd of April, 1847. Van Diemen's Land was a place where anarchy bubbled inside those forms and structures that suggested a reasonable and well-governed society. The reality of the society, the actual experience of living in the place, wasn't determined by those very British forms and structures, but the far messier human reality where men in power appointed mates as magistrates regardless of their ignorance of the law, where a criminal thug might be given a police uniform despite his history of violence, and sent to an isolated community where he would reign as a petty tyrant. It was a society that was deeply corroded by cronyism and ineptitude, and where officials would unhesitatingly lie under oath to save their own skin and persecute the innocent. It was a place where business activity was carried out with vigorous coercion, and where the fate of a lieutenant governor could be determined by who he mistakenly excluded from an invitation list. And, as you and your brother would soon discover, it was a place where a certificate of freedom offered at best a precarious kind of freedom, and the greatest chance for a good life was found in a local community of people who looked after each other well.